We're on page 12. We stopped at footnote 4, but let's take it at the beginning of the paragraph. Yet notwithstanding the greatness of Chizkiyahu's generation, this was the exception among all the generations of the first temple. A more typical situation is described by Ezra, Yirmiyahu, and the other prophets, in which the people were estranged from the Torah. So even though we like to reminisce about the past being wonderful and amazing and beautiful, really, it wasn't always that way. Here's where we're picking up from last week. Conceivably, wants to read for us. Page 12, in the text where there's a little number 4. Conceivably.
Conceivably, this alienation may have had its source in the priest's distinct status and their guardian of the Torah and inner sanctums, remote from the nation. However, this was not born of malevolence. Rather, it was the result of an overzealous sense of their responsibility for preserving the Torah and ensuring its transmission intact and complete to the coming generations. This protectiveness led the priests to conceal the Torah from the masses, just as one hides a valuable vessel. But as the priests guarded the secrets of Torah, they slowly and unintentionally caused the nation's spirit to wither, severed from its life source.
Pause right there.
Wow.
There's something called a law of unintended consequences. Sometimes you try to do something and you work so hard to accomplish something that you really accomplish the opposite of what you were trying to accomplish. We have, I'll give you an example that comes up in my head, the law of unintended consequences. I have many students that chose to serve in the Israeli military. And as American citizens, they don't have to serve for longer than, when you volunteer as a soldier, you serve for 15 months. The average Israeli serves for 3 years. That's the time an Israeli serves. What happens very often to American volunteers as they're serving their 13th, 14th, 15th month is they decide, hey, I want to stay in Israel. I like this place enough. I know the language now. I want to stay. I want to go to school here. I want to marry here. I want to raise kids here. Whatever they want to do, they want to stay here. And what happens is that once you get released after 15 months and you make aliyah, so you're no longer obligated to go to the military because they count your 15 months of military service as a volunteer for your Israeli military service. Until someone got wind of this, that there are some Americans that know they want to stay in Israel, but they first draft as American volunteers for 15 months, and then they make aliyah the day after they get out of the army, in which case they skip, another year and a half of service, which they would have had to do had they made aliyah first. So the Israeli military decided they don't like people playing games with them, they're going to make a new law. The law is, at 15 months, if you want to stay in Israel, you either have to finish your 3-year army term, or you have to leave Israel for 2 years before you can come back. Yes?
So my friend's daughter made aliyah
But
last
for girls
year.
it's different.
Girls, it's different.
A little different. What happened to
It's
her?
completely different.
She made aliyah. She's still in Israel. She's working. She's learning Hebrew.
Did she
and
go to the military?
No one
No.
said anything to her about the
Right.
military.
Sometimes-
How old is she?
She must be 20.
Okay, the girls.
However you would be if you were graduated from college this year.
22? That's already the
2.
age where oftentimes, especially if you're a girl, the army just doesn't draft you.
If they are before 18, I know because my daughter made she served in the army as a volunteer. If you are 18, you have to. But if you make aliyah for girls after 20, they
I see.
give
So
you.
she said.
Yeah,
they
and-
let you
or-
go.
The minute they go to
Because you
draft
are
her,
a
she's
woman.
coming back, and her mother told
So
her.
let's say you
does.
come married. For that happens sometimes. People
So definitely
they also
don't
don't want to, because the moment you're married, it's a lot. They already have to pay for your wife, for your kids, for your. There's
You're
a lot of
exempt.
things that they automatically exempt you. Sometimes Americans will come at a certain age, and at that age they'll have to go to Ulpan. They have to go to. By the time the army finishes training you, and at the age of 23, you're only obligated to serve 6 months. So the army doesn't see it worth it for them to draft a person, spend 6 months training them how to speak Hebrew, and then what are they going to do with them? Then they send them home. So oftentimes people make aliyah and they're not even required to draft in the first place. But here, what I saw by my students were very often their parents were already at odds with them staying in Israel, living in Israel, drafting to the army for 15 months. Now they listen, you're 20, 21, we want you to go to college. And the parents say, we don't want you to stay for another year and a half in the military. Why don't you just come home for 2 years, start university, make aliyah afterwards? From every single one of those students of mine who went back to the United States to 2 years of college, nobody went back. Once you come back here, you're living a good life, you're in college, you're with your parents, the retention rate that Israel had was 0%. And they were trying to solve one problem, but inevitably by solving one problem, they were losing all the people that were interested actually in living in Israel. This happens all the time in all kinds of places. The Kohanim, the priests, are so obsessed with holding on to the Torah and making sure that nobody taints it, that nobody meddles with it, that essentially the people have no access to it, which leads them to stray from it. And essentially, by the time we roll around with Ezra, he walks into a generation of Jewish people who don't have anything to do with the Torah at all. It's not necessarily malicious. We have a generation that's very similar to this a few hundred years ago, at least according to the Hasidim and their perspective of what the events were. Not everyone agrees with that narrative, but the Hasidim feel that they're born in the Baal Shem Tov, specifically the Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, feels that he's born into an elitist Ashkenazi Jewish community in which only Torah scholars have access to their faith and to their religion, and the regular people were kept in the dark about Judaism. And he decided it's not right, it's not the way it should work, and he decides to bring the Torah back to the people. And he's persecuted most of his life because of this attitude that he has. This is not a new problem, that people try to keep something safe, and by keeping something safe, it ultimately disappears. This happens in different ways, not just with religion, with other things. You try to keep something a secret, and it really becomes a secret. It's like sometimes I hide something so that I can find it later, but I hide it so well that I can't find it. You ever do that? It's something that happens in life.
Absolutely.
It's exactly what happens here with the Torah. And so Ezra comes to fix the situation. I really want to keep going.
Ezra came to redress this situation. The Talmud teaches that Ezra's enactments were inspired by the biblical verse describing the Israelites walking in the desert for 3 days until they found water to quench their thirst. By comparing the Torah to water, there's no water other than Torah.
Our rabbis often refer to water and Torah to be the same thing, which is why on certain holidays, Ushaftem, Mayim, Besason, songs that have to do with water are often connected to Torah. The idea, there are many ideas behind it, but perhaps the most simple of them and the most definitive is water is necessary for life. Our rabbis believe Torah is necessary for life too. And because of that, Ezra ensured.
So, because of this, Ezra ensured that 3 days would never pass without the reading of the Torah, which happens Monday, Thursday, and on Shabbos.
And that's 3 days at a time in which we read the Torah.
Changing the script of the Torah?
Yeah, the next section that we're going to do is hard. It's complicated. And I'm going to warn you in advance that it won't leave anybody feeling happy. What I mean to say is we really like the things that we were raised with, perhaps, or that we've heard, or that resonate with us. And that is that the Torah that we have behind me in the ark right now has never changed, never will change, has never been different. Yes, we believe in that on a philosophical level. The fact of the matter is that on an actual practical level, we know that ancient Hebrew doesn't look like the way Hebrew today looks like. And we know that the letters in the Torah that we have today, there are opinions that believe that those letters were not the same letters that we had back in the day. I sent you a few pictures in the Google Classroom a few weeks ago, so it could be you've forgotten about them already. But if you go to the Google Classroom, I shared with you the evolution of the Hebrew script from when we originally started writing Hebrew until where we are today. If you go to the Israel Museum, I think in Israel, I believe I saw a big chart over there also that shows how the letters evolved. The letters of Hebrew, as they used to be written, even those of you who know how to read Hebrew, myself included, will not be able to read the Hebrew script that we have then. It's very important to understanding what happens in the next chapter. Let's read it first, and then I'm happy to go with you into all the details about what is and what isn't accurate or anything else. So changing the script of the Torah. Who wants to read this first?
I'll read it. The Talmud also states that Ezra was not satisfied with establishing a framework for the reading of the Torah, but even changed its script. Originally, the Torah was given to Israel in Hebrew characters and in the sacred Hebrew language. In the time of Ezra, the Torah was given again in Assyrian script and the Aramaic language. Finally, they chose the Assyrian characters and Hebrew language for Israel, leaving the Hebrew characters and Aramaic language for the Hedyotot, usually laymen.
Right. Hedyotot, the root of that is the same root as the English word idiot, which is not meant to be idiot. In old language, it's Hedyot is like an ignoramus. Yeah,
Well,
ignoramus eventually in English came out to be idiot, but it's not. A Hedyot is like a very simple lay person, someone who's not well educated. Assyrian script, in Hebrew we call that Ktav Ashurit. If you ever look at the writing of the Sefer Torah or the Mezuzah or the Tefillin, that block script with crowns on it, what you know to be Torah script, in Hebrew we call that Ktav Ashurit, Assyrian script. Whereas handwritten Hebrew is called Ivrit. And so there are two kinds of writings of Hebrew, Ktav Ivri and Ktav Ashuri. Those are two different writings, and we're now talking about the Assyrian script is the Ashurit way in which we're writing the Torah here.
But you mentioned Aramaic.
But I have a question before we even get to that.
Yes.
It says the Torah was given again.
It's a term in Islam when he brings the Torah a second time. It's like the second giving of the Torah. There's not actually another Mount. That's a good point. It's not another Mount Sinai episode, but like when the Torah is reintroduced the second time, it was reintroduced as in Assyrian characters.
So when Moshe got it, originally it was in the other characters.
According to this teaching in the Talmud, we're going to show there are three contradicting teachings of the Talmud. Yeah?
Just checking.
Yeah, you're right.
מי כתב את הספר הזה?
Of Binyamin Lau.
So it's according to what he says, or he just...
No, he's quoting now. It's a Talmud that he's quoting.
Okay, בסדר.
In Sanhedrin 21b. You keep going.
To whom does Hayadot refer? Rabbi Hista said the Kuthians.
Who are the Kuthians? Kutim.
Samaritans,
זה לא השומרים, שומרונים?
not the good Samaritans.
Kutim are those who converted to Judaism. They were non-Jewish, but they never fully integrated into the Jewish community. They converted out of fear.
Who's this?
The Kutim. It's a group
The
of
Kutim,
Jews
yes,
that were
yes.
not. Our rabbis were always had a love-hate relationship with them. They were Jewish enough for certain things and not Jewish enough for other things. So he's referring. Who are the Hedyotot? They're the Kutim. That's one opinion.
Oh, really?
And what is meant by Hebrew characters? Rabbi Hista said the Libuna A, ancient Hebrew script. It was taught, Rabbi Yosef said, had Moses not preceded him, Ezra would have merited receiving the Torah for Israel. Of Moses it is written, and Moses went up to God, and of Ezra it is written, he, Ezra, went up from Babylon. Just as the going up of the former refers to the receiving of the law, so too the going up of the latter. Of Moses it says, and at that time the Lord commanded me to teach you statutes and laws. And of Ezra it says, for Ezra prepared his heart to expound the law of the Lord, to do it and to teach Israel statutes and laws. Even though the Torah was not given through him, its script was changed through him.
So the Gemara in Sanhedrin goes out of its way to compare two characters. Moshe, who's the greatest Jewish sage that we believe in, and Ezra as the second. Meaning, if Moshe didn't exist, Ezra would have been the one to receive the Torah. I don't know that most Jews know how much importance Ezra has in rabbinic literature. And our rabbis go so far as to say that even though the Torah was given through Moshe and not through Ezra, but Ezra had the opportunity that he's changed the script of the Torah, that almost like he is the second giver of the Torah. Now, the moment you start talking about changing scripts of Torah is the moment that red lights start going off in your head, especially for those who may have been educated in the Orthodox Jewish tradition, which nothing changes. Again, this is always a key word. Let's look and see a little bit more, and I'll go back and address this.
This homily links the character of Ezra to that of Moses. While Moses was chosen to give the Torah to Israel, it was Ezra who merited the renewal of its script, and, by extension, the creation of a framework linking the Torah to the people. The Babylonian exile had not only severed the Jewish people from its land, but from its language as well. 70 years of exile sufficed to replace the Hebrew vernacular with Aramaic. Over the vast expanses of the Persian Empire, Aramaic was the official state language. Indeed, we have found letters and bills written entirely in Aramaic. The book of Ezra describes how Ezra, meeting with the returnees of Jerusalem, discovered that the Hebrew Torah was incomprehensible for many of them.
And now he's quoting directly out of the Tanakh from the book of Nehemiah.
Ezra the priest brought the Torah before the congregation, consisting of men and women, and all those old enough to understand, on the first day of the 7th month. And he read from it, facing the square, to the men and women and those who could understand. The ears of all the people were given to the scroll of the Torah, and they read from the scroll in the Torah of God, translating it and giving the sense so that they understood the reading.
They call him Ezra the priest, not Ezra the sofer.
That's right. Normally we're calling
What
him
family
Ezra.
was he from?
Kohen? He was a Kohen,
Okay,
yes. That's why they call him
so
Ezra.
it's okay.
He was.
But
from
he
the
He
Quran.
was, but he chose to identify by a sofer, the scribe, which we're going to talk about as well. Here, what you see is the people are listening to the Torah, but nobody actually understands what's happening until they translate the Torah from them. I don't know if you know that in rabbinic law, when you read the Torah on Shabbat morning, the obligation on the Chazan, and the one who's reading, is to read every verse once in Hebrew, and then someone else has to translate that verse into Aramaic. This is the way the Torah was read for thousands of years. My family in Israel still reads the Torah this way. In almost every Yemenite community left, it's the only one left that still does this. The one verse is read, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, and someone in the community translates that into Aramaic. I mean, there was that was the language the Jews spoke. That became the next. Before there was Yiddish, and before there was English, and before there was Ladino, people spoke Aramaic. That was the language of
It's
the
like
world.
reading it in Hebrew and then
in English. That's right. And as people effectively also stopped understanding Aramaic, that custom fell by the wayside. Which is interesting that they never changed it to English or to Yiddish or whatever else it would be. It fell by the wayside. And again, you're in a state today where I think when the Torah reader is reading, unless you have the English translation with you, not everyone understands what's going on. Then this is part of that generation that doesn't know how to understand the Hebrew text the way it's written.
But the ketubah is still written in Aramaic.
The ketubah is written in most of our documents are written in Aramaic. Very few of our documents are written in Hebrew. When I do weddings in Israel, I always write two ketubahs. One in Aramaic, that's the one I officially file, and one in Hebrew, which is what I read out loud. Because the Israelis don't speak Aramaic, and they actually do speak Hebrew.
Do you read Aramaic?
No, but they speak
That's,
it sounds like Hebrew.
The same.
It sounds exactly like Hebrew.
It sounds like Hebrew the way Arabic sounds like Hebrew. Yeah, if you know enough Hebrew to understand roots and the way words, and there are letters that change. Yeah, we do read prayers here in Aramaic.
Kaddish.
Yeah, Kaddish is in Aramaic.
Kaddish?
Yes.
The Brich Shmei prayer that we,
That's Aramaic?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
Aramaic.
That's not Hebrew.
Yes, it's
That was
Aramaic.
specifically written in Aramaic so people can understand what they were saying. The prayer in Ashkenazi communities, they sing this. That's all Aramaic. All of these are parts of the prayer that were meant to really be understood by the people. And yeah, as Aramaic, we also don't. My grandfather spoke Aramaic. He wrote Aramaic. Aramaic was a language that he was very fluent in, just like Hebrew. I think his generation is the last of the Aramaic speakers. And today, those who truly sat in yeshiva and studied, Aramaic is a language comfortable enough for them that they could sit and say. For example, my father reads and understands Aramaic probably more fluently than I do. He spent more time with Aramaic text than I do. He's also older than I am, so he's studied for longer. But oftentimes when I get stuck on an Aramaic word, I ask my father. That's where we go.
That as
But the Aramaic, one more thing. The Aramaic that we read, Jews, being the Jewish community, it's not the same. There are nations that still speak Aramaic, like the Chaldeans, they speak Aramaic. The Samaritans in Israel, they're trying very hard to preserve their Aramaic language. Kurdish Jews, if you know any Jews that are Kurds, they speak Aramaic. These are obviously different dialects of Aramaic that for 2,000 years have become modernized with time, and also have become influenced not by Jewish culture, but by whatever cultures they're in which case it's very hard for those of us who speak Hebrew or Jewish Aramaic to understand all of other Aramaic, but our Aramaic is written in Hebrew letters. So someone who actually speaks Aramaic would not be able to read our Aramaic. We don't write Aramaic in the Aramaic script. We write Aramaic transliterated into Hebrew. The way that Sephardic Jews, like the Rambam, wrote Arabic in Hebrew letters. It would be like you writing Spanish with Hebrew letters, or English with Hebrew letters. It's transliterated to the language which Jews were familiar with. Yeah.
Without Ezra's mediation, translating it and giving the sense, there was no chance of understanding the text. The ancient Hebrew script of the monarchical period was that used by the educated classes, the Torah's professional spokesman. We see a similar phenomenon today in the professional writing of various disciplines, such as law, medicine, and science, which leave laymen totally dependent upon the mediation of the professionals.
My wife, when she writes academic articles, she always asks, "Can you read it for me and tell me what you think?" I don't understand what you're saying. I think it's a little bit of a snob attitude that they have. They write in a certain kind of English. It's very cryptic. Nothing is meant to be explained overly. I'm a commoner in terms of academic articles. I don't understand what they're saying, and I happen to not enjoy reading them because they're not user-friendly and they're not kind to the people who are not in that field. But for them, that's the language in which they communicate.
But it's also a way of writing where you don't have to have massive explanations. I mean, it makes
That's
it
correct.
shorter and easier.
That's correct. So
and
the
we
same
can
thing
work.
is happening with the Torah as well.
Eventually, the Torah was preserved by the priests in its ancient language, and none of the laymen had any possibility of understanding or reading it. The educated strata were loath to have the masses of ordinary folk participate in their lofty deliberations. Ooh,
Yeah, that's a real thing. It's a real
that's
problem.
heavy.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get involved in things that you don't understand. You almost couldn't say that in today's world. Maybe soon you'll be able to say it again. But you can't say it now. It's meant to explain yourself. Then there were intellectual elites, and you're just a commoner, so know your place. Don't get involved in Torah conversation. You're not cut out for it.
But, there's a danger in that,
Of course.
because the danger is they're interpreting, and if they're your judges, they're deciding.
Well, that's what we said. Without
Yeah.
Ezra's mediation,
Yeah.
there was no chance of understanding the text, which means we're
Yeah.
solely relying on someone
Exactly.
else to interpret this
Yeah.
for us.
Right,
Right.
right.
It's always a problem with everything.
Concealment served the interest of guarding a body of knowledge that was regarded as infinitely precious. This code was violated by Ezra, a member of the professional guild of the priests. Ezra thus rendered the Torah comprehensible and accessible to the masses. Now that the script had been changed, Ezra could demand that the people begin to avail themselves of this user-friendly Torah, which had until then been a closed book.
So Ezra violates the code. The code is don't let commoners have access to the Torah. Who's upkeeping that code? Which class? Which class of people? The Kohanim. Ezra is a traitor to his own social class. He's the Kohen who says, I don't want this to be an inheritance only for Kohanim.
Because he spent time with the commonal.
With the people. But you have to understand that Ezra, this is part of already his not identifying with Kohanim as much as with the Sufrim, with the authors of the Torah. Here, Ezra is taking something back to the people. It deserves to go back to the people. And this, like everything else we've read until now, instituting prayers that people can do, not just in the temple. Whatever Ezra is bringing the Torah reading to the people instead of them having to. All of these things, Ezra is trying as much as possible to get the Jewish people to reclaim their religious identity.
But he had to. It was all part of a movement away from the temple. And the temple was destroyed, away from the priests being the only ones.
That's right.
I mean, it had to happen. Otherwise, Judaism would be ended.
And that's exactly what we're trying to get at, which is oftentimes those who innovate in order to preserve the Torah are those who preserve the Torah. Not every innovation that is not the way we traditionally do things is evil. We have this attitude.
It's
in the
not
community.
evil.
Every new thing is evil. Not necessarily. Ezra is the one who really shakes up a lot. Our religion that we have today is not the same as pre-Ezra Torah. It's post-Ezra Torah. And we have to own that Ezra really brought some major changes to the Jewish
So
community.
the pendulum always swings back and forth. So the pendulum swung from an inaccessible Torah to accessible, and now it's very accessible. Is it too accessible?
There's an argument like that too. When Art Scroll began translating the Talmud into English, there was war in the Jewish community. It's bad enough that we've been persecuted for 2,000 years by Jewish converts to Catholicism who read and interpret all kinds of Talmudic passages to sound anti-Semitic. Now you're going to translate into English and let the whole world have access to the Torah? We had a struggle with that. That was the internal Jewish struggle. And if you look in the first volumes of Art Scroll's Talmud, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of letters of approval from different rabbis saying it's okay. It's better that our people should have access to the Torah than nobody should have access to it and they won't use it against us. But sometimes that's a question too. It's kind of like, I'm sure if you would speak to a medical professional, a doctor, let's say, they'll tell you that in this generation there's something interesting, that a lot of people are owning their own health. They're educating themselves about their health. They're advocating for themselves in health. The risk, and that's
Can't trust the doctors.
Yes,
Internet.
Right? The risk with that, and I'll tell you the flip side of that, is all of a sudden you have all kinds of people who are reading. All their information comes from blogs and from some stay-at-home mom who's writing. And then at the end of the day, the medical professional is still the medical professional, and that means that there are people that will walk into that doctor's office with this attitude of, listen, you went to med school, but I stayed up all night last night reading blogs, and you have. So is it a good thing or a bad thing? I think inevitably it brings in its wake good things and bad things, and that's something that you're always going to struggle with. I don't think in a world where people blindly trust doctors that's a healthy place either. I know both of my parents today wouldn't be with us if we blindly trusted doctors who diagnosed them and decided. Like last week, my father, when he had his brain aneurysm and went to the doctor, they sent him home from the emergency room with Tylenol. They said, you just have a headache, go home. That's if we didn't fight and push, we being my mother and whoever was with her, it would have never happened. On the other hand, if everything the doctor tells you, you know better, so why do you waste the doctor's time by going to the doctor? Just take care of yourself at home with your internet browser.
But you have to use the information with a bit of seichel, and you have to be able to determine like the 90% that's made up junk and the 10% that's real, or look in the right places.
They say
where
about
there
common sense is not so common though. That's the problem. Not everybody knows how to look. All of you are on social media, I'm assuming to one extent or another, maybe not entirely. You see people share all kinds of things. I'm not put politics off the table. Simple untruths. Johns Hopkins University found out that if you eat a pound of sugar every day, it'll take away all your heart risk. You stupid! You're sharing such an article. Of course, it's a hoax. Someone made an article. There's a lot of misinformation that goes around, and you see that some of your friends are people who are unable at all to even fact check before they share something. This is a very scary thing. It's a world in which people don't know. They simply lack the ability to. They believe everything that's written on paper.
Shame.
In the world, there may have been a world. I don't know that I'm even believing in that, but they say there was a world where, in order to be published, you had to be somebody who was worth publishing, and therefore the books that were published by scholarly individuals who could be trusted. Let's assume that to be true. I'm not certain. In today's world, everybody can. Even I can publish a book. You don't even have to go to a publisher to publish a book. You just go to your local print shop. You go to Amazon. You go to Lulu.com. Or you can publish anything you want. The amount of information that comes out that is inaccurate and is not critiqued or censored or reviewed by anybody, it's tremendous. It's tremendous. So I think there is a risk. You definitely have, the moment the Torah becomes accessible, all kinds of people manipulating the Torah to mean to them whatever they want and start their own movements and start their own groups.
But that's life today.
That's
it's life
correct.
always.
That is life, especially today. I mean, you can say X, and from X, you can get Y, Z, and A, and start all the beginning from the beginning, which is totally incorrect and totally unmeaningful. But most people don't even care about looking further than that.
Yeah.
And they just go with what they read, and they believe it. And then you have problems.
I'll tell you a story about me. This is a real story. Mark Twain said, the best thing about rumors is you learn things about yourself you never knew before.
That's right.
This is
It's true.
So there was a person that I was not close to, but someone I would see them, hello, how are you? And then I noticed overnight, every time I'd see them, they'd go, I didn't know what was going on. I know I didn't do anything to them. So I reached out and said, what's going on? Are you okay? Did I do something to you? Have I offended you? And they said, no, I can't associate myself with a rabbi who performs intermarriages. I sat up and I said, okay, what does that have to do with me? It turns out that I had done a wedding a long time for a person who had converted to Judaism. And this individual I'm referring to, their rabbi didn't accept that conversion to be a valid. It was an Orthodox conversion, whatever you want to call it. It was not. Doesn't make a difference. And this person had heard from there. I said, "Oh, where were you last Shabbat? I was in Rabbi Yoni's community. Oh, don't go there. It's very dangerous. He does intermarriages in the Jewish community." And this person, instead of asking, like, what does intermarriage mean? Do you do a half Catholic, half Jewish? Or what happened over there? Nobody asked. The guy didn't ask. He just went and assumed that, hey, it's true. It must be true that this guy performs intermarriages. Nobody. In that moment, I realized there's not a point to get upset. Not a point. This is a person who doesn't have in their mind the thought that perhaps before you follow through with information, you should verify it. Check it. You can give me a call. I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you the story. That I didn't even realize it was a story till I found out. But that's a thing that happens all the time today. People hear things, they don't bother to check a secondary, and there's some things that are very easy to check. You don't have to work so hard to check them.
Well, what I was thinking about accessibility is that I think a lot of Jewish women today prefer a reform or conservative synagogue because they feel like they have accessibility to the Torah. They can be called up to read at the Torah and have an aliyah right there from the Torah. They read during the High Holy services, from the Torah. Some congregations, I told you one, gets passed around, everyone gets to hold the Torah. So that's accessible. In a lot of other congregations, there's the mechitza, right? And some women are put off by that.
Though I think we're talking
feels
about
the Torah is not accessible. Well,
You're talking about
there's book reading, there's
Okay,
the
that's
pages
right,
of
that's
the
right.
Torah, and then there's the overall Torah. I mean, some
So
women
I-
want to read from the Torah on Saturday morning.
So if I could say that
Yeah.
what we're talking about here in terms of accessibility is accessibility to information.
Yeah.
You're talking about accessibility in terms of religious participation.
But doesn't it go hand in hand?
Not necessarily.
Oh, really?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
If you go to most communities, I don't think most men ever read from, maybe they go up to the Torah, but reading from the Torah or leading services. In my community, there are 2 or 3 people who lead services, and that's it. Even if I have a room of 50 people, none of them will ever be leading services or reading from the Torah. We're not a very community participating type, unlike other communities where everybody will prepare their bar mitzvah portion, everybody will, different. Here, what Ezra is trying to do, and it could be that because in today's world, we look at the synagogue as, again, the center of Jewish life, and everything that happens here, everybody wants to be participating in. But in the life of Islam, participating in Torah study is what it makes a person a scholar versus not a scholar. When you're living in a community where that's what defines you. Are you from the scholarly class, or are you from the Amei Haaretz, the ignoramus class? You have the Hedyutot. You have a choice now. Now, through Ezra, you have the ability to promote yourself to a newer class that has, at least at this point in the book, nothing to do with how much you participate as much as how much you are well read and studied and have access to the information at hand. I'll tell you that this teaching about Ezra and the changing of the script of the Torah is not a unanimously accepted opinion. It is mentioned in the Talmud. It is one of 3 opinions of the Talmud. The text that, if you've seen the, if you want to go to your Google Classroom, you can see it. The Hebrew alphabet, as it was, does not look like the alphabet that we have today.
Correct.
And the problem is that there are pieces of the Talmud that directly contradict this through a story. For example, in the Hebrew script, which this paragraph says, the Torah was given in Hebrew characters. In Hebrew characters, there are no. You have a mem and you have an en mem, a final mem. You have
Sofit.
a mem sofit. You have a samech and you have a
Samech Sofit.
a pei and a pei sofit.
Yes.
You have certain
A pay and
en
a pay
letters.
Sofit.
Yes.
Correct. Tzadik and tzadik.
In original Hebrew, you have no such end letters. The letters end the same as any other text. Only in Ashulit Hebrew, in Assyrian Hebrew, do the letters have final letters. So, how does a mem look in regular Hebrew?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll write it for you.
Let's show you. I'll show you. An en mem looks like that. You see that?
Yeah.
It looks like a O almost. It's a
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, our rabbis say the miraculous part of the Ten Commandments was when the final letters were there. They say that the Torah was engraved through and through. Thank you. Oh, very good.
It's on Google Classroom?
Yeah, it was from few classical.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah, you will see. Just look for it. I like to.
So whereas you see an aleph like this,
Thank you.
an aleph in Hebrew looks like that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's say everyone knows it.
You give us a paper.
Yeah.
not one.
I once did, right? A bet looks like that. A gimel, but thank you. The mem, our rabbis say, was so miraculous that the letters were engraved through the tablets. See, when you engrave a line through a tablet, a vav, it's okay. It can go through and through.
Yeah.
Wow.
What happens when you engrave a circle in a tablet? The middle piece would fall out. A rabbi say it was a miracle in the Ten Commandments. The middle piece didn't fall out. Okay, leave that as it is. If that's true, that means that according to those rabbis who say this was the miracle of the Ten Commandments, then the writing that was originally in the Torah was Ashurit, was Assyrian Hebrew, and not Hebrew. And so you find there are 3 different opinions among our rabbis. But for the sake of this discussion in this book, Rabbi Lau seems to only be referring to one of them because it shows how Israel wished to make the text more accessible to people, even though there are other opinions as to how the Torah is written. The Assyrian writing is what we use today in the Torah scroll. Let me see if I can get it.
It doesn't show you.
I don't know.
The same
Now that we have
page.
3 Torahs, it's not so simple to get one
The
open.
24th, I don't know why it doesn't show. You see, I have 3, and it's written Hebrew.
Can you send it?
I don't know how to do it.
This writing is Assyrian Hebrew writing.
Oh.
It's different than when we write Hebrew. You know how to write script Hebrew? Yes.
Yes, a little bit.
So let me show you
Hmm.
the best way to illustrate this.
מה זה סקריפט?
כתב רגיל. איך קוראים לזה בעברית?
כתיב בכתב.
גם היא יכולה.
דפוס,
So in Hebrew, when you're
דפוס
when
it's print and כתיב זה...
someone have a pencil and a paper. Here, I have a paper. Good. have.
Sorry.
I'm going to do a very cryptic aleph. So whereas in Ashuri Hebrew, or in written block Hebrew, that's an aleph.
Mm-hmm.
When Israeli children write,
Round and down.
this is an aleph.
Okay.
I know, but I write like an American.
Okay.
That is my teacher over here. So. You write an aleph like that.
Correct.
Now, but in Sephardic Hebrew, that's not how you write an aleph at all. This handwritten script is an Ashkenazi script. This is the way that Ashkenazi Jews wrote Hebrew in like what would be cursive to us. Sephardic Jews wrote in what's called chatzi kulmus,
No, Rashi?
like Rashi script, almost like Rashi.
אבא
Exactly.
שלי גם היה כותב.
Really?
Rashi script.
Is that
That's not so true, is it? It's not true anymore, is it?
No. But at the Cheder, that's how they used to in
I
Morocco.
teach him how to write.
That's how
Wow.
my father used to. I like how
Yeah?
In Rashi script, there is no. I don't know that Rashi knew how to read Rashi script. Rashi script was not invented by Rashi, and let me just show you what I mean when I say Rashi script.
So why we call it Rashi?
That's a great question. This is Rashi script. See this writing?
Yes.
Okay.
It's called Rashi because when
See
the
that?
publishers
It's
of the
like-
Chumash were printing their books, so before you had like laser fonts and all kinds of nice, margins and pages, how do you make sure that people know this is the text of the Torah and this is the text of the commentary? You
They
use
did it in
different
different.
fonts.
They used different fonts.
Fonts,
Yes.
right. So it happens to be the foremost commentary on the Chumash that was printed was Rashi. And so Rashi was always printed in a different font that looked like this. And it later became known as Rashi script because that's the script in which Rashi was printed on the Chumash. Rashi may or may not have written anything in that script, but the Sephardic Jews always wrote in a script that was much more similar. I don't have it here. Was much more similar to Rashi than other things were. There are still Sephardic rabbis. Dalia mentioned her father. My grandfather in Morocco. That's how they taught them how to write. There was no other way to write Hebrew. The way that we write in modern Hebrew today, that's the Ashkenazi version of Rashi script.
Wasn't that done
בבוק
by?
דתגב, תסתכל, הוא גם
what's
כותב
his
קצת
name?
דומה, כי הוא מחנך במרוקו.
Wasn't that
מעניין.
done in the 1940s with that guy? What was his name?
מעניין.
Who?
Evan Yehuda.
Yeah, there's
Wasn't
Ben
that-
Yehuda.
Evan Yehuda
Right.
who did that, and he made the script what it is today. That's what we're using.
מעניין אותי לראות איך הוא כותב. כי הוא התחנך
Just
במרוקו.
from the
אבל
40s?
זה
קצת-
זה עברית.
כן, אבל זה
Wow.
שונה
Yes.
קצת. זה לא, זה בקושי כמו ערבית.
What was it
Yeah,
before?
right.
בקושי אפשר להבין.
They wrote differently, and in the 40s, this guy Evan Yehuda, brilliant man,
כי הוא התחנך במרוקו.
changed the whole language
ממש.
and to make it into a speakable, usable language. That's what he did. His poetry is phenomenal. Oh, the guy was a genius.
Wow.
Maybe next week I'll bring you
What year was that?
In the 40s, he
That-
did.
even
that's
earlier.
right.
It
It was
20s,
earlier. He
20s,
started.
30s.
He started in the 20s and 30s, but he finished the language completely
Right, and
in the
the-
40s.
Eliezer Ben Yehuda is the one who
I-
standardizes.
And there
the-
was some man or someone who's the grandchild or the son of him. Did I meet him through you, or maybe not? You would.
I don't think so.
reference. Okay.
He's very interesting, Eliezer Ben Yehuda, because a lot of the Zionist movement characters are given credit for a lot of things that they shouldn't be given sole credit for. So, for example, Theodor Herzl is always known as the founder of the modern political Zionist movement. There
Not
were
me.
many people before him who started already the political Zionist movement. Theodor Herzl matches a very specific bill, though. He's not a religious Jew. He's a European Jew, and he doesn't really care much about his Judaism,
Not at
which
all.
is a classic father for a movement of socialist Jews who don't care much for their Judaism, who want to talk about Zionism and going back to Israel without any religious context to it. And that's why Theodor Herzl is chosen by the secular Zionist movement as their figure.
Leader.
The same reason why the ultra-Orthodox community wants everyone to believe that Theodor Herzl is the father of the Zionist movement, because the ultra-Orthodox community hates secular Jews and anything to do with Zionism. If they could show you that the Zionist movement was a secular Jewish movement that really has nothing to do with the Jewish longing for the land of Israel, Theodor Herzl is the guy to go to. There are a number of people in our history. Eliezer Ben Yehuda does the same thing. Eliezer Ben Yehuda does a tremendous service to the Jewish people and our language. He's an expert in Hebrew. He's a yeshiva educated man who later in life goes on his own way. he was friends with Rav Kook, with all the early poets and the authors in that generation. Eliezer ben Yehuda essentially makes Hebrew standardized. So whereas until then you could say certain things in Hebrew in different ways, Hebrew is a loose language that we've been writing and speaking in for 2,000 years. So what does it mean Eliezer ben Yehuda, he revived the Hebrew language? Among Jews that did not study Torah, did not write in Torah Hebrew, that Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews, no matter where you were in the world, we communicated in Hebrew with each other. That was a language that we all spoke, we all read, and we all wrote. All meaning the educated among us, the rabbis among us were able to communicate. There's always been letters between Spain and Germany and France and Yemen and Morocco. All the letters keep going, and they're all in Hebrew. So Eliezer ben Yehuda reviving the Hebrew language is really reviving the spoken Hebrew language among Jews who are not observant Jews who speak in Hebrew or read in Hebrew or pray in Hebrew. And he should be given credit for that, but I think sometimes he's given a little bit too much credit, as if the Jews before him didn't know Hebrew at all. And that's not an accurate portrayal of Eliezer ben Yehuda's contribution to the Jewish community.
I think what he did was amazing.
Fantastic.
I think
We're big fans of Eliezer ben Yehuda. No, I'm not taking away from him.
No. Because when I went to Israel and I learned to speak Hebrew and write and everything else, we learned all about him. And I mean, from the very beginning, I mean, it wasn't an easy task what he took. And he wrote beautiful poetry.
So you have to look at something amazing, which is Jews come from all over the world to a state of Israel. And people who were born, and every one of them in a different country, manage in a year or 2 or 3 to all be speaking the same language, a language that none of them had ever spoken before.
Correct.
That's a fantastic accomplishment. I don't know if you would think about it. Like, to get everyone in a country to speak English, well, a lot of people know English. In different places, you go to university in English, you studied in high school English, doesn't make a difference where you were born. But imagine if we say, let's get all the American Jews together, move them to Canada, and they're all going to speak Chinese next year. How do you get everyone to do that? That's an incredible accomplishment. Let alone a language which other people are not speaking actively, like Hebrew. That accomplishment was tremendous, and I don't know that we give it enough credit, that how big of a deal it was, that so many people from so many different backgrounds, they all ended up speaking Hebrew. Let's look at the next section here.
Ensuring payments for the scribes.
That's right. This part here is
Page 15.
Maybe someone else will read.
Oh, you want to? Oh, I didn't realize you had a book.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Where are we, Paulette?
On
Restoring
page,
Torah
50.
observance?
ensuring payment for the
ensuring
scribes.
payment. It's on,
Ensuring payment for the scribes. The Talmud, in Tractate Peshem, describes a number of fasts that were observed by the men of the Great Assembly. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, the men of the Great Assembly observed 24 fasts so that those who write Torah scrolls, tefillim, and mezuzot would not become wealthy, for if they became wealthy, they would not write. Interesting.
How are the men of the Great Assembly different from the Sanhedrin?
There are 2 different bodies of people that may have been one connected to the other, but the men of the Great Assembly are 120 elders that essentially they lead the Jewish people after the generation of the prophets into the generation of the sages. That's who the men of the Great Assembly are. The Sanhedrin is the name of a court. It's a Greek name for any group of 70 elders that
Was it 70 or 72?
70.
70 elders.
Okay.
Yeah, 72 is the name of Hashem. That's why I think it's 72.
Oh.
Yes, and that are sitting in Jerusalem, that are the supreme court of Jewish law. And that's the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is anybody could be a Sanhedrin. Technically, you could have a Sanhedrin today also if you wanted to. A men of the Great Assembly, you wouldn't be able to. That was a specific period of time, a specific group of people.
Unless we recall the prior enactments of the men of the Great Assembly, the passage makes no sense. Why was it specifically the men of the Great Assembly who had to fast and to ensure the livelihood of the scribes? Evidently, introducing the Torah to the entire people through public readings and writing it in comprehensible Assyrian script resulted in an increased demand for the scrolls, and naturally prices rose. The men of the Great Assembly wanted Torah scrolls to be in every household, and it was for this reason that they prayed for the scribes not to become too rich, to make sure they would continue their work.
It's a weird teaching that the rabbis are fasting so the scribes don't get too rich. But the people who get too rich, they say that hunger is a strong motivator. People who are not hungry don't care about working or don't care about going out to get a job because they have food, they're taken care of. In life, when there's supply and demand. Supply and demand is the more people want Sifrei Torah, the more expensive Sifrei Torah will get. if the scribes become wealthy, they won't write anymore, and then people won't have access to these texts. And the whole purpose of the men of the Great Assembly is to try to get a Torah in every home, a scroll in every home, books in every home. And the way they could do that is by hoping the scribes don't reach a place where they don't want to write anymore, where they decide they don't need employment, in which case we'll go back to a place where nobody owns books because nobody's writing them anymore.
So obviously there were a very limited number of scribes.
Very limited compared to the amount of
And they
people.
didn't train new scribes?
No, they did. Why not?
But this doesn't make any sense.
How many
Why
Jews
not?
are there in the world? 13 million. How many scribes are in the world? Even if you had 1 million, it still would be not the same amount as the people who need books. Meaning, it just means that however many scribes there are, we want them to keep writing.
There are not that many people or rabbis that go into being a scribe.
Rabbi, not necessarily a scribe.
No, I know that.
Well, we're talking about thousands of years ago,
Right.
we're not talking today.
Even today, it's the
Even
same.
today, it's the same thing.
Most of the
Do you
rabbis
see
not
that?
scribe.
Before Ezra, that the common people really didn't know how to read and didn't have any books. So
Yeah.
there was a very huge
Gap.
change. They became literate.
That's right.
Wow, that's incredible. It
That-
wasn't just a
that-
Torah they had access
Yeah,
to.
they were
had actual
illiterate.
book.
They were
It's a
illiterate.
whole new place in terms of
Totally.
literacy, not just in Torah. They didn't read or write before this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a completely different society then.
That's right.
Yes.
This is a revolution.
Yeah.
It may be happening silently or quietly, but it's transforming the Jewish landscape almost to the point where we're not even aware, or most Jews might not be aware, that there was even this period of illiteracy in the Jewish people.
Oh, absolutely. there was.
Well, you know, we have all these bubamaises about the Jewish people.
That's right. That's part of what makes our tradition.
We've been literate since we stood at Mount Sinai. We
I'm
could
a
all
Sefer.
read and write, and everyone was brilliant. There was doctors and lawyers. They just happened to be slaves in Egypt, you know. It's like- and none of that is
It
true.
happened in the Christian religion. The Catholic Church kept everybody
That's right. It
down,
happened in-
and then there was this.
It's the easiest way to control people is to keep them illiterate, or to keep them not as intelligent as you. I
or
once
not
met a
give them
man.
access.
I once met a man
They do
who
that in
told
the
me
Arabic world.
he would never marry a woman who had a college education.
Huh?
Why not? He said, because I will never marry somebody who could be smarter than me.
Oh, he said.
The guy was a
Very
dumb so
insecure
of
guy.
course he like
He was a
had
total
to, He
idiot.
probably had to marry somebody
Yes.
in kindergarten to not be smarter than him. But there are people in the world that the only way they know. There are two kinds of educators. There are educators who only teach you a certain amount so you don't surpass them. And there are those who are not afraid of teaching you so much, so they're very confident in what they know. The greatest thing that could happen to them is if you would surpass them. But there are many religions, ours included. I believe very much that what goes on in the ultra-Orthodox community in terms of keeping people away from a secular education and getting jobs, and
Oh, that's
is the
terrible.
moment that happens is the moment you have to have real leadership who people can look up to, and not people that are just that are controlling the masses by keeping them uneducated. And that's something that not everyone's ready for. Not everyone's ready to. They know that the moment someone has another option, they'll leave.
Tell me, why are they so against the secular? The Orthodox.
He just said.
Which part of
Why?
the secular education?
Yes, why are they so against?
My belief, it's
They
not what those are.
threaten.
My belief, it's a threat.
Of
The moment
course.
you your horizons expand,
Change, it's always a
you're
threat.
gonna walk right out on me. They have zero. It's ironic. The people who they think they're protecting the Torah really have no faith in the Torah.
Oh.
They believe that the moment somebody knows something else, they'll leave it, and that might be because their Torah is so small, so juvenile. That's really it can't keep everyone in.
They
It's a-
really think like that?
It's an easy way to control a society.
Control
Think
people.
about it. Think about the fact that it's in Israel.
They don't
Forget
challenge
America. In Israel, almost the entire ultra-Orthodox population lives on handouts.
Yes.
Handouts of political parties.
Correct.
Handouts of yeshivot.
Correct.
Handouts of people helping them with their rent, and people helping them with their food, people helping them with their kids. In which case, the moment a political party says, "Vote for me," oh, you have to vote for them. This is who
Feed
feeds
you.
us.
Right.
It's the best way to control people. It's a disgusting thing to watch, but it's a tremendous way to control people. It's much harder to have people that can take care of themselves and feed themselves and still want you. That's a difficult thing. That's great leadership, but not everyone merits to see great leadership. Yeah, well, I once wrote down a quote. Let me just see if I can find it. Sorry, one second.
That's amazing to me.
You're also never challenged. So you don't have to really know your stuff all that well, or you never have to do any research. You never have to expand your knowledge because no one's ever challenging you.
That's true.
That's deep. That's
That's
scary.
very scary.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very. But you have control. And
Yeah,
you
but,
ensure your power.
So I once came across a quote that said, "The beautiful thing about learning is that no one can take it away from you.
Yes.
Once you know, there's not a force in the world that can take it from you. So it led me to write an article in which part of the article was that there are two kinds of educators in the world. Those who wish to hide everything from you, to keep you uneducated, and therefore secure their control over you. And there are those who work laboriously to educate you, give you the dignity of being a thinking human being, and providing you the tools to be learned and control your own destiny. There are two different types of educators that exist.
Totally different.
And they're it's something you still see in the world. Forget rabbis, forget Judaism. It's something you see everywhere. Are you trying to enable me and empower me, or are you trying to educate me in a certain way so that you can always have control of me?
Yep.
And that's something that exists
Today.
until today, including today.
That's awfully sad.
It is very sad.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's terribly sad.
You know, part of I've met in the last 2 years or so, most of my Shabbat classes here at Kehillat HaShamayim have been dedicated to issues, social issues in Judaism. Not political issues, but social issues. It's been a part of me that is, I'm much more interested in that than I am in kashrut, but somehow people still care more about Cheetos than they do about homeless people on the street. And so they still want to know if the Cheetos are dairy or not dairy, or if the Bamba at Trader Joe's is good for Passover or not. Unfortunately, you must be aware there still is a very juvenile Jewish attitude, and not everyone is cut out for what may be more sophisticated than that, and you have to cater to both. As an educator, you have to take care of everybody. So part of what I've been trying to do on Shabbat is deal with issues that we don't always get to deal with. What was I telling you this for? Educators?
Educators, two kinds of additional educators. To enable their
Social issues?
Something that's kind of things like homelessness in Halakha. What is our obligation as a society towards people who can't afford living in a home, or can't afford tuition, or can't afford whatever it will be, and this leads to other issues, like maybe it's their fault that they're homeless. There's a lot of anger towards the homeless community. It's for sure I would take care of poor people, but they're choosing to be. There's a lot of this dialogue that goes on back and forth, and we have to. What does Judaism say about the school system? I think a lot of us know what we believe in terms of values of education, but not everyone knows what traditional Jewish texts have to say about standardized schooling. And the answer is that if you open up a Chumash and you open up a Siddur and you see how did the Creator plan for children to be educated, and there's no mention of a school at all in the
It's
Chumash.
parents.
Parents.
That's right.
It's parents. You should
Yes.
teach your children and you should speak to them.
That's
When?
right.
Not from 9 to 5 or 8 till 3.
All day long.
When you sit in your home, when
That's
you
right.
walk in the street,
Absolutely.
when you wake up, meaning education is something natural. It's something that has to happen in an organic setting.
Correct.
Who do we entrust with education? The only person who loves that child. The person who says, listen, there's no first grade and second grade and third grade. There's my child and what they're able to handle right now. Some children in first grade are extremely gifted and they're already on a fifth grade level. Some kids in fifth grade are still struggling on things that second graders or third graders
Correct.
aren't. And when we standardize education, and the people who are educating our children are not in love with our children, they don't truly care about it. It's about how many tests can we pass and what's the score, what's the GPA of the class, am I getting a
Correct.
promotion this year, am I going to be the teacher of the year award, and these are real. I need my class to pass their SATs and to see how many Ivy League schools are we getting our kids into from this high school. And I'm not complaining at teachers who are dedicated to educating students on a high level. It's not my complaint. But when we reach a place where parents are either not educated enough to teach their children, because not everyone can teach their children everything. Some people don't know math well enough to teach their children math. Not everyone knows Torah well enough to teach Torah. So we start hiring other people to educate our children. Some of us work. That's a real thing in life. We have jobs to do. It's not like your kid can come with you to work, and while you're on the farm working, you also teach your children. You're in a business. You're away at a desk somewhere in Sorrento Valley. You can't bring your kids there. There's nothing to teach your child there. So from those hours that you're away, you pay other people to educate your children. And essentially what we've done with the school system is it's an entirely impersonal system in which people are meant to fit it's one
Mold.
size fits all.
Standardized.
It's a standardized. It's standardized, and
It's the
people.
same thing with medicine.
It's exactly the same. It's
There's
many.
no individual.
Many of the fields that we're involved in struggle with this. There's no focus on the individual at all. By the way, a lot of what we talk about in terms of politics and policies, we're always focusing on a standard and never on there are individuals that don't fit the topics or the categories that you're discussing. And we as a people, I see that the role of an educator went from being a second parent to being just somebody who needs you to pass the test. I need you to sit here 45 minutes and that desk, don't talk, don't make noise, just listen to what I'm telling you and you better pass the test on Monday. And that's very scary because that's all you get from school. And
At least to average.
right, that's right.
least
At least the
average.
average. That's right. And
That's the environment of the school district.
That
It
is our
comes
country
from
today.
Hayat.
Well, of course it comes. It starts with the superintendent down.
Even
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'll hold it here.
Smart people don't know education.
Not anymore.
And you know
It
how
means that
that
someone
plays out.
who's more talented sometimes is stuck on a level that's not for them because they're at a certain age where they can, and someone who's not able to, as
They
you
fall
know,
through the cracks.
they fall through the cracks, and then you reach people that you see, they never really finished school, they never truly learned things. Teachers lose a tremendous opportunity being role models for more than just science or history. They could really be people that you look up to. You know, I was talking to somebody here in the community who grew up in backcountry Texas. There was one school teacher for all the kids. There was a one room schoolhouse, and not everything that was taught there. I mean, you're sitting with little kids and with adults. That's all. It doesn't remember everything that was taught in that classroom. But the teacher was like the aristocrat of the town. Everyone respected this lady. She was the educator of the town. When parents had problems with their kids outside of school, they would go to her house to solve these problems. She was a personality that was known. It was a wise person you could look up to. How many parents feel that way about their kids' teachers? If you fail my kid, I'm gonna come to school and scream at you until you. That's all the teacher is. It's just somebody that works for you. Work for me. That's how that attitude is. And unfortunately, I think that we've really undermined our children and society at large by such a standardized school system. On a realistic level, though, we don't really have many options. You're not going to keep your kids at home all day with you, and you'll go crazy, and they'll go crazy, and you're not really going to be able to teach them.
But there is a rise in homeschooling, and there's an
Tremendous rise.
organized system for homeschooling. I don't know about inside the Jewish world,
Yeah,
but
also,
secular.
also.
And there are structures and different things that they have.
I believe that is a attempt to return back to something more natural.
Yeah, more natural, more individual, more specific for the child's emotional temperament.
You know, when I went to
Ability
yeshiva,
to absorb information.
something fascinating about yeshiva, aside from our secular studies are standard. So you have to pass whatever SAT, whatever test that the state requires you to pass. But in terms of our Judaic studies, there weren't really any grades. I mean, there's no 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, first year of college. You go in depending on your level. What level are you in? And you can either progress very high, very fast. You could be sitting in a room, full of 20-year-olds when you're 15, if you're at that level of understanding. I remember in my 9th grade class, we had some 40-year-olds that were sitting in our class. They're people that came to the United States that had a lot of Iranian refugees that came, and they were 30, they were 25, they were adults who had never been even to day school, and so they were integrated into the yeshiva, but they went to whatever level they were on, and that was the 9th grade level, and they were sitting with us in class. That was a very normal thing. You'd have a 14-year-old kid with a 25-year-old study partner, because just because you're a certain age or you're in a certain grade doesn't mean you're stuck in that place. And I think that other people don't have the opportunity to study really, really in an individualized level. Every student has their teacher. So it's my teacher, the person I go to for advice outside of class, the person I deal with when I have issues in my dormitory. My teacher is the one who's responsible for those things. It's a much bigger job description than just teaching Talmud. And I think there's a way to recreate that in the regular world as well, not just in the halls of the yeshiva, but people need to want before you can change. All right. Restoring Torah observance. Let's do this and we'll end for today.
Alongside renewing the study of the Torah by all sectors of the nation, the men of the Great Assembly attempted to restore the former stature of the observance of the Torah. The spiritual condition of the returnees to Zion was abysmal. Assimilation, estrangement from the Torah, and the banality of everyday existence all combined to create an alienated Jewish society with an amorphous religious identity. At this point, the men of the Great Assembly acted to make protective fence around the Torah.
I mean, if you studied Pirkei Avot, you know that the first
Yes.
generation of rabbis, which begins to talk about making fences around the Torah, is
Correct.
this generation. And there's a reason for it. There's a reason why before then nobody spoke about this, and why from that point on this became a thing.
The need to introduce edicts so as to prevent people from sinning resulted from the loss of standing of the halakha among the people. The clearest example of this is the decree of the men of the Great Assembly regarding the Lords of Muktzah. Oh, God, I haven't heard that word in a long time.
Wrong.
Muktzah.
What is it?
What is that?
You can't
We'll read
sound
about it now,
this.
and then I'll explain what's not clear.
Our rabbis taught. At first they, the sages, ruled that 3 utensils may be handled on the Sabbath. A fig cake knife.
What is a fig cake?
I was going to
A
ask.
cake made of fig.
You ever see how figs are transported in the Middle East? You see a little bit of it here in the stores. So you don't. If you see figs that come from Turkey, they don't
Yes.
come in boxes.
Oh,
They're like a round.
yeah,
Yes, and they put
They're-
them in
they're
circles.
They're put
Muktzah.
together. Really, once you separate them, they fall apart.
Yes.
But they're pressed together so they can easily transport them. They would have these big cakes of figs, and the
Oh,
way you cut them, there's a special knife that separates the figs from each other, so you can take this big. It's not like a cake baked with figs. It's a utensil on Shabbat that is used for separating figs.
A soup pot ladle, and a small table knife. Then they permitted other articles, and they permitted again still more, and they permitted yet further until they ruled all utensils may be handled on the Sabbath except a large saw and the pin of a plough. Rabbi Hanina said, this Mishnah was taught in the days of Nehemiah, son of Hakhalaliah, is written, in those days I saw in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in sheaves.
Okay, let's make sense of muktzeh means designated or put aside for something. There are certain utensils which you can use on Shabbat, and certain utensils which have no purpose to be used on Shabbat. The example of that, a fig cake knife, a soup pot ladle, a small table knife. Those are, what's the difference in a table knife and a saw? They're both things that cut.
Different sizes.
But they're different sizes and they're meant for different things. The table knife is used for things that you would need for Shabbat, to cut your chicken, to cut bread, whatever it is you need for that. The saw, for what reason do you have to carry a saw on Shabbat? The only reason you carry a saw is to cut wood, but you can't cut wood on Shabbat. So our rabbis instituted a category called muktzeh. A saw is muktzeh. It's something you cannot touch on Shabbat because there's no purpose for you to be using it on Shabbat. And you see that as the generations keep moving, the rabbis are permitting certain things, forbidding other things, meaning they're seeing what is the problem with the world. It's kind of like, if I could throw an example. If the rabbis would have seen that people are having a hard time with driving on Shabbat, they would announce keys are muktzeh to touch on Shabbat. Good luck starting your car without a key. Yeah, it's an idea that in order. Okay,
Well,
today you probably have cars. You start with that keys.
Can't
The
use
idea
that.
was if we could get people to stay away from this small thing, they won't be able to do that thing. These laws of muktzeh still apply in many different areas in Shabbat. A lot of the laws of Shabbat have to do this, but there's a philosophy behind it, and that's in the next paragraph. Marlene, you want to read the oral tradition?
The oral tradition recorded in this Braita describes the development of the laws of muktzeh. According to this tradition, Nehemiah witnessed wholesale desecration of Shabbat in Jerusalem, as evidenced by people treading wine presses and gathering sheaves.
And that's the last verse we quoted there in the Talmud. Like it was a normal weekday. Shabbat was a normal day.
Shabbat had become totally profane, its observance at an all-time low. Not only was it not observed, its very existence had been forgotten.
Let me pause there. This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, since my classes in LA about pagans among us and all that. There was a TV, a news, like a 10-minute clip from the news in Israel that came out, that there are more and more artists in Israel, musicians, that are not performing on Shabbat. They're not observant people, but they don't want to play concerts on Friday night. Yeah, they call them all kinds of names, but these are not people like with kippot, and they're regular Israelis who just feel that Shabbat for them is a day they want to take off. They still want to be with their family, they want to go to synagogue, everyone is doing something else. And it's so much so that the National Israeli Music Festival has moved from Shabbat to a weekday. And that has made some people in Israel feel like, well, they're forcing religion down our throat. That's become a national dialogue. And they went around interviewing people, and I think what a lot of people don't realize is there's a difference between not keeping all the laws of Shabbat and forgetting about Shabbat entirely. There is this attitude where in Israel, yes, not everyone observes Shabbat, But most Israelis, for them, Shabbat is different than Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. For some, it could be different that they do a Friday night dinner together. Some that are less traditional, it's the day they go to the beach instead of going to work. But it's a day that is different from all other days. And in the consciousness of Israelis, Shabbat is the day of rest, even if it's not observed halachically the way the Shulchan Aruch would want it to be observed. What Ezra and Nehemiah are seeing, it's a generation where Shabbat, it's not even just not observed, it's totally forgotten. Nobody even knows that the Friday night Saturday, is the Jewish day of rest, regardless of how they observe it, and that's what's bothering the people. And I think in the conversations that we discuss in the Jewish community about Shabbat observance and Shabbat, how much are we discussing about the details of Jewish law and observance of Shabbat, and how much about the national identity that many Jews still consider Shabbat their Shabbat. The way that Shabbat is observed may not be the same as everyone else, but it would be incorrect to say just because someone doesn't observe Shabbat the way halakha would require them to observe Shabbat, that they've entirely disregarded Shabbat in the first place. Sorry that I keep interrupting you.
Perhaps it was the returnees' struggle for survival that had thrown them into such an intense whirlwind of work. 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But this was the sad situation in Jerusalem in the days of the Great Assembly. The people's alienation from Torah was so deep that it could not be remedied simply by the cosmetic fix of instituting public readings of the Torah. A major upheaval was needed to bring the people back to its roots. Nehemiah was no Democrat and made no pretension of consulting with others.
He was no Democrat, didn't consult with us. This is Nehemiah's, we're being honest here about how Nehemiah approached this situation.
But maybe he knew more than others. To make the Shabbat part of the world and the mentality of the Jews once again, he decided to introduce a dramatic change. The Shabbat was desecrated primarily by the wine traders and wine merchants. In other words, in the context of trade and employment. Accordingly, Nehemiah prohibited the use of all tools on Shabbat, only permitting the 3 tools that were used by the people for their Shabbat meals. Over the years, as general awareness of Shabbat observance increased, it became possible to become gradually more lenient. So they permitted, again, still more, until they arrived at the Mishnaic formulation. All utensils may be handled on the Shabbat, except for a large saw and the pin of a plow. Classic utensils for performing professional work on Shabbat. This was part of the concept, place a protective fence around the Torah.
So the idea here is that as the generation becomes more observant, the need to micromanage everything that happens falls by the wayside. It's almost, it's like when you have a stranglehold on something, it's because you're afraid of losing it. When you're not afraid of losing it, you don't hold on to it so tightly. And you see this with jealous partners, a husband, a wife, a girlfriend, boyfriend. The more jealous someone is, oftentimes, is because they really are feeling insecure about what's going on over here. Then when a person says, listen, I trust who I'm married to, I trust who I'm with, I'm not checking their phone, I'm not checking their whatever it is that people, they're not putting a GPS under their car, I'm not, I'm not hiring a private investigator. This attitude is one of, when I trust more, I relax more. The rabbis of the generation of Nehemiah are seeing widespread Shabbat desecration, and what they do is crack down in a way that is so intense that even in the Mishnaic times they have to get rid of all those decrees. Everything is allowed on Shabbat except for the 1 or 2 things that are reasonable to prohibit people touching on Shabbat. And this all is part of the greater concept of make a fence around the Torah, meaning sometimes the Torah on its own is not enough, and the rabbis felt you have to introduce more things. I believe that there are a lot of, talking about Baba Maises. Baba Maisa literally means a grandmother's tale. Things that are told to people to keep them on the straight and narrow. Like if you have a tattoo, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. There is no such Jewish law that there are people every day who are buried in Jewish cemeteries with tattoos. What about all the Holocaust survivors who have tattoos? They can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery? The attitude was, I'm almost positive, I don't know that I'm right, that some bubby somewhere didn't want her grandkids to get tattoos. She told them, listen, the worst thing's going to happen is we're not even going to let you get buried in a Jewish cemetery. Somehow I've heard teachers teach that you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you have a tattoo. It doesn't mean that you're allowed to get that. According to Torah, you still don't get tattoos. But the consequence of that is not, we're going to throw you out of the Jewish cemetery. That's like the worst. It's one thing to get thrown out of the Jewish community, but if you can't even die with other Jews, that's the worst of the worst. There are many things in our tradition that are they're played to be a lot harsher than they are, and I think that was someone trying to keep somebody else on the straight and narrow. Like it could be that once upon a time, if somebody was dating somebody not Jewish and they sat shiva on them, that made them, oh my gosh, I'm going to come back to my family. Today, if you sit shiva for somebody, they're just going to walk out on you and slam the door. That's all that's going to happen. And it could be that there were different places in time where that defibrillator shocked people into life, but in other situations, that wasn't the way to go. And the rabbis very much viewed that every leadership of every generation has to have a certain level of flexibility with how it deals with that generation. God willing, we'll do more next week.
מתי עוזרת למגילה?